Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is Afri Abundance. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing another overview for my African Ancestry Remember Who You Are Study Guide Volume 1 that I've been doing here on my channel, just going through various topics and sharing my point of view on how these experiences affect my life personally as an African American woman in the diaspora. So I've got the study guide here. And the section that I'm going to be reading today is going to be in the topic of power. Now, in my last video, which I will tag in this video as well, I talked about victory and what victory means to me. So this topic is kind of walking into one another, as I kind of stated in my last video. A lot of these topics can really piggyback off of each other and really fit together as an entire picture in itself. These are just the individual puzzle pieces that make up the entirety of our experiences in the diaspora. So victory and power, I feel like, are both on the same scale. So this is the power section, and I'm going to share what my answers were and discuss what that means to me. And this one has 2 pages, so there's a few different questions that I have filled out with my answer. So I'm going to read a quote here that is at the top of the page here that I feel like is really meaningful, a very basic question, to ask yourself as an African American in the diaspora. So what if you got your identity back? No weapon formed would prosper. What if this is the moment where you find your greatest power? So I think that's a really good question to ask yourself and kind of go over in your mind mentally. So in this exercise, the first question here was, are you who you want to be? And my answer to that question was yes. And I'm going to explain why my answer is yes. So I feel like in terms of internally being where I want to be, as far as being in an acceptance of my culture, being in an acceptance of who I am, loving myself, and things of that nature, that is why I put yes here, because I am who I want to be. I have embraced every part of myself, and there is nothing that can keep me from loving who I am, loving my people, standing with my people, supporting my people, and separating myself from people who do not support our experiences or our livelihood in general. So I am where I want to be when it comes to that. The next question here was, what has helped you embrace who you are? So my answer here is kind of a long answer. I can probably drag it on a little bit more because there's a lot that I feel like has helped me on this journey. So I'm just going to explain kind of the deep-rooted basis of what has helped me on this journey. So I wrote here, learning the truth of our ancestors and history outside of neocolonial centered negative banter from disingenuous persons claiming allyship. So that answer to me is learning that not everyone who comes with this ideology of allyship is for you or your people or your experiences. So I've definitely been able to tell the difference between people who are genuine and people who are disingenuous. So there's a fine line between being a disingenuous person and being genuine in your nature. So I feel like on this journey, I've been able to tell the difference between someone who cares about my experiences as an African American woman and someone who jokingly perceives themselves to be, an ally to our experiences and standing, with us when they're not truly for us. I feel like it's very important to pay attention to people who are selfish in that nature and present themselves to be something that they're not, pretending like they know all of the history about, um, the slave trade, for example. I've always heard a lot of people who claim to be in allyship try to make jokes and say things like, well, Africans enslaved other Africans, kind of that kind of negative banter is something that sticks out to me as not being a genuine person. And it's very important to pay attention to people who try to dilute the experiences, who try to, overlook you as a person and how you are treated in society, and not minimizing your experiences, because at the end of the day, someone who truly cares about you and someone who is truly in support of you is not going to minimize you, and they're not going to ignore the truth of your experiences. So that's definitely something I've learned on this journey, and it has kept me, safe in my, in my shelter, um, and making sure that I connect with genuine persons. So I'm going to go to the next page, and there are 3 more questions here that I'm going to explain and give my answers to. So the next question here was, what has prevented you from embracing who you are? I feel like before I really went on this journey and wanted to, dive deeper into, who I am, who my people were, what information that I wasn't otherwise given growing up was there out there for me. I feel like what prevented me from embracing it was not being in culturally affirming environments. Now, that means to me not being in an environment or around people who support who you are as a whole. I feel like, you know, maybe there are other people who have had these experiences as well, but me personally, speaking for myself, being in environments where people don't support me in my, in my Africanness, for example, being proud of being who I am, and not being an acceptance of you unless you pretend to be like them, or unless you take on, their nature. I feel like there are a lot of people who only will accept you if you do what they do, walk how they walk, talk how they talk. So I feel like those are things that prevented me from embracing who I was, because it was otherwise not supported. And, I didn't see it being reflected in my surroundings. The next question here, this one says, where do you find strength, hope, and support? Now, I feel like this is a really good one. I feel like, along this journey, it has been a very much solo endeavor. I've definitely went on this journey, alone. I've done a lot of spiritual work, grounding myself in, in my roots. And I feel like a lot of that strength and that support comes from self love. So that's kind of like the main aspect of support that I feel I have had, because I don't have a lot of, you know, um, African surroundings. I don't live in a, in a state where there is demographically a lot of this type of ancestrally connecting communities. So it definitely does make it a lot more complicated when you're looking for it and it's not in your surroundings already. But my answer for that was being rooted in practices that highlight the intelligence of my ancestors and foremothers. So I feel like, in absence of those surroundings and those communities that otherwise do not exist in, my locality, I feel like rooting myself in, spiritual practices and the plant healing practices that I have learned, from across the continent, and what our ancestors did, how they healed themselves, how our foremothers, for example, their birthing experiences, how they had doulas and they had, a lot of plant-based practices that kept their bodies healthy and, able to deliver, their children on their own, and taking their health into their own hands. I feel like those are a lot of the practices that I have rooted myself in, that have really drawn me closer to my ancestral foremothers. And I feel like that's very important as a Black woman, is to remember who your foremothers were, because they were the key to our existence as a whole. And the last question here, this one says, who are the ancestors that inspire you? Now, as I've kind of explained in, a few of my other videos, I don't have a lot of family who are connected to the continent. So it's definitely, there's definitely a space there that is not filled. However, my answer for that one is, outside of not having close familial ties to the continent, I find inspiration in the living advocates who are welcoming and embracing African Americans to come home. And I put here, for example, I know for a lot of people in the Pan African, community, and who are a part of this movement, are very much in support of and standing with Ibrahim Traore. And I feel like he is a living ancestor. I feel like a lot of the things that he is doing in Burkina Faso are very inspiring, and to see him inviting and being welcoming of African Americans to even come to his country and to be accepted there is definitely an indication that we have living ancestors who are living and fighting on the ground right now, who we should be paying attention to and be proud of and be in support of. So I'm definitely very much inspired by, what he's doing for Burkina Faso, and how he has opened that door and given that invitation to African Americans in that diaspora to say, hey, I'm in support of our people. And, he's a living testament to what our ancestors were doing before, they were removed from those positions. And I feel like he's just a really inspiring individual altogether. So those were my answers for those questions. There's a lot of really good topics in here, and I could even go further with my answers, but for the sake of, the time for each video, I will just give those little tidbits that I feel like are really meaningful, really powerful. I feel like there's another section here that I wanted to read, and this one is in the same aspect of, when you have embraced your power, then you know who you are, you know yourself on a deeper level. So in this section, I'm just going to read what it says regarding knowing. Oops. So in this section, it says, what if you knew you were Tikar of Cameroon, or the Ashanti people of Ghana? So it says here, Africa consists of thousands of languages, traditions, cultural practices, and beliefs that are found in many ethnic groups across the continent. AfricanAncestry.com has found ancestry results for its customers from 27 different African countries. So I feel like that is a really good question to ask yourself, especially for someone who doesn't really know, where their lineage leads beyond, being from the American South. A lot of us who have our grandparents that came from places like Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, South Carolina. I feel like knowing beyond those shores where our people came from before they got there is something that is going to deeply root you in something more powerful and something more significant. So I feel like, for anyone who truly wants to know, having something lucrative that you can tie yourself to and learn about and give to your children to learn about, it's very important to that knowing piece, to that power that you will gain from that knowledge. So I feel like for anyone who is in the diaspora, who is, maybe just starting out on their journey of knowing themselves outside of, the American South, AfricanAncestry.com is a beautiful platform where you can truly learn who your people are. You can go on this journey. I'm planning, even for myself, to get involved and go on, the return journey and be able to get back to that soil where your foremothers were taken from and really embrace that experience that was very traumatic. It was very, you know, hurtful and harmful, but it's going to be really important for healing that ancestral trauma. So I'm really, thankful to Gina Page for, giving this to the diaspora so that we all can take what we need from it to aid ourselves, our family, our children in healing and, removing that shade of disconnection from ourselves and recognizing that there is not much of a difference between us and our African brothers and sisters who know who they are and who are from the continent. There's not much of a difference from us other than we were taken, and not by our own will. So I feel like it's very important, for your own self-esteem to look at your African brothers and sisters and see like, well, there's not a difference between us. You know who you are. I don't. Mine was stolen. Yours wasn't. Yours was carried on through your grandparents. I don't know what mine is because my grandparents were enslaved. So figuring out that there's no difference between us and embracing one another, I feel like is very important. And knowing is the platform for reaching that internal goal of self-love and self-acceptance. So that's going to be it for this live today. Like I said, I will definitely be sharing more resources, for information that you can find about yourself and, do the studying, find, books about history and who, Thomas Sankara was and how Traore is somebody who is, like I said, a living ancestor who is walking in their footsteps and doing the work that they were doing. And, knowing who Nkrumah is and what his legacy was and how he wanted to bring the people together and being a Pan-African and seeing each other as brothers and sisters who have gone through traumatic experiences that need to heal, and remember who they are from the inside in order to alleviate these, self-limiting, mentalities that we have that are being perpetuated by, neocolonialism, which has definitely been a detriment to all of our mental health as a collective. So definitely be in support of Africans. AfricanAncestry.com is a good platform. You can find a lot of information and, start your journey and get yourself where you feel like you want to be and know, who you are, what your experiences were, and how hard your people fought to survive and to be where they are today. So give this video 2 thumbs up, like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more DIYs, recipes, and reviews. Happy New Year to you all, and I hope to return in the 2026 New Year with fresh new content and more immersive topics and experiences within the African diaspora as a Pan-African myself. So stay tuned.